Right, Doug. Nice of you to ask me to come around here. I understand you've got one or two things you want to ask me about my youth in Birmingham when the war was on. The first thing I would like to mention, in case how should we say, the smart Alex in the audience have not spotted it. No, the tie.
Oh.
No, the tie does not mean I went to Swanhurst School.
It looks like it.
It is, it's the pocket tie, but
Yeah.
I didn't go to Swanhurst School. But I found this tie in my front garden a few years back. So I took it home, said to my missus, wash this, iron it,
Yeah.
and as green is my favourite colour, that's it.
Excellent.
Right, now then, where do you want to start, Doug?
Frank, how old were you when the war started, and what do you remember about the start of the war?
When the war started, I was actually 10. What do I remember when the war started? That's easy enough. We weren't surprised when it started, even as kids. Everybody seemed to know it was coming, but when, they weren't quite certain. Obviously Hitler went to the well once too often. When he went to start on Poland, we couldn't hold back anymore. But already the comics that we read as kids had switched from just thrilling stories to wartime stories. Of course, as the war hadn't started, they were doing the First World War for the stories. When the war started, they cut those up in about 2 weeks, and all the stories were then around the English forces winning everything for the benefit of the kids. The actual day that war started, I was at church with my family, and we knew that a statement would be made by the Prime Minister at 11 o'clock. Well, the service had started, and just after about 11:15, along comes a priest, and he goes, "Beetle, beetle, beetle," dramatically across the front of the church, and beetle, 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 up the steps of the pulpit he goes, and there's a pause, and everybody listens, and he says, "I've just heard on the radio from from Neville Chamberlain that we have now declared war on Germany. And if anybody wishes to leave, they can consider they've attended the service and they can go." Not one person got up and not one person moved. They just looked at each other, that sort of thing. We came home as a family, we went into the house, and the old man said, "Okay, well, no point in messing about, get on with our lunch." So we had our usual Sunday lunch. And after lunch, he said, "Right, the old man, we get started now, clear the cellar out." So we went downstairs, fetched all the lumber out of the cellar and either threw it away or stuck it in the front garden or moved it, whatever, and made it pretty habitable. When it came to the night, I remember I was sleeping up in the attics at the time in my own little personal room, which I quite liked. I was brought down one level, so I'd be handier when the air raid started, because we all expected the air raid to start the first night. In actual fact, we went to bed quite early in those days as kids. We went to bed and nothing happened at all. We probably had to look out the window and you could see searchlights on the sky, but that's all. And almost disappointed next day that we hadn't done an air raid. That was the 4th of September. By the time that was Monday, by the time we went shopping with our parents, or mother it would be, the shopkeepers in Moseley, of course, had already stopped giving paper bags out. Now they said, "Don't go paper bags, there's war on." That was the first stroke for the effort from the shopkeepers. And for several days, till we started school, nothing happened. We started school on about the 15th of September, and as kids, everybody was told to carry their gas masks with them wherever they went. We duly turned up and we were at assembly and whatever, and the headmaster came down and said, "Right, now you've all got your gas masks, haven't you? Put them on the desk in front of you." And of course one or two couldn't. They were promptly fetched up, told to go home and get it. That obviously couldn't happen nowadays because the parents would probably be at home, at work. After 2 or 3 days like that, by then the kids had got the message and they always brought their gas masks with them. There again, as far as the school were concerned, we played war games, but in the end it just fizzled out and life went on as it was before. When we finally got to our first air raid, we were duly woken up by parents, taken down the cellar, and obviously nothing happened at all. This probably happened for 2 or 3 times. Then there was the odd air raid when you could hear German bombers droning overhead. And then of course, as time went on, it got quite heavy and the anti-aircraft guns were making quite a lot of noise. And you could hear bombs falling. On my own personal house, we had 3 incendiary bomb cities, but luckily it was a tiled roof, and they didn't go through the tiles.
Mm.
They just sort of spoilt the tiles and bounced off and rolled into the front garden or back garden, the case may be. The only hole they came through was in the kitchen, which was done with slates, and he went through that and started a fire. And although it was a place, I didn't see it because I was kept down in the cellar, but I was told it was full of smoke. The canary was in there, the canary survived.
Mm.
Yes. The other exciting thing, as far as kids were concerned, was after these air raids, was to turn up with a piece of shell splinter, which they referred to as shrapnel, which it isn't really, and brag about who got the biggest piece at school. And of course, if you get the fin off an incendiary bomb, when you were well away, well, my old man, who was an air raid warden, he would say, well, they've been falling like confetti, the incendiary bombs. Don't worry about fins, they'll be all over the garden, all over the road. But when I got up to go to school at about 8:30, they'd all gone. Early birds had got them.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it progressed. But rationing was not diabolical. Sweets weren't rationed, but I wasn't a great sweet eater anyway, they didn't bother me. And the other rations were quite adequate, in my opinion anyway.
Frank, whereabouts in Moseley were you living?
I was actually living in Oxford Road in a big three-storey house. And we had a cellar, as I mentioned, and on the first day, or very nearly after that, the first day, the old man reinforced the cellar roof with big balks of timber which we got down there, luckily, so we were quite safe. Now, when I say safe, that's me to say you could still be embedded by the entire house if it had fallen down. People that hadn't got cellars, they had shelters in the garden, which were known as Anderson shelters, which were made of curved corrugated iron, and they were usually half submerged in the garden and the soil piled on top. One or two people had elaborate jobs and can submerge the complete lot. As far as my father was concerned, he was an air raid warden, and the air raid warden used to go out at night, patrol, and if there was somebody showing a light, ring the bell and quite politely ask them to draw the curtains, switch the light, whatever. It wasn't really quite like Dad's Army portrayed. There were also Home Guard, which, funnily enough, was stationed, their house was next door to us, the Home Guard, and they were quite an efficient sort of unit. And when the warning started and we got incendiary bombs, the wardens were going around squirting them with stirrup pumps and sand, and the poor Home Guard had nothing to do. So they approached the wardens and said, next time there's a raid, could they help? So the air raid wardens, who were usually older men, said of course they could. And so they all got together, which meant that the wardens had a very easy time with the younger blokes running around fetching this, fetching that. As far as bomb damage was concerned, in Oxford Road, there's just past School Road a couple of new houses. That's where one big house used to be, that was demolished or wrecked. And on the other side of the road there were some bombs that removed the houses. And I'm not certain which house it was now because I was only a kid, but on the other side of the road, that's the, you might say the west side of the road, I went up as a kid to look at where the house was, and literally all there was just a big hole.
Frank, what was it like during an air raid?
During an air raid, we were sitting down in the cellar, and of course, as time went on, we'd evolved the cellar so that it was quite comfortable. We had a kitchen table down there, and the odd bit of sweet ration we got, we used to turn into chocolate. And when the raid started, we were scampering down there, we knew we had a biscuit and a bit of chocolate. If the things were very noisy, and sometimes it was very noisy, of course, you were glad to be down there. But otherwise, when nothing much happening, we would be probably playing cards or reading a book. And originally when the war started, we'd go down when the raid started, but as it became more of a regular occurrence, raids most nights, we had our beds organised down in the cellar. So when it came to bedtime, we went downstairs into the cellar, which had electric fire. It was quite cosy and draft-proof because it was all put together for gas, that sort of thing. And we would have quite a cosy night. So sometimes we'd been asleep and there'd been a mild rain, and us two kids hadn't really even known about it.
Mm.
So I can't say life was all that uncomfortable while the air raids went on. At the time, one humorous little bit, we had a grandmother staying with us, and in those days, grandmothers always seemed a lot older than they are now.
Mm.
And this little old lady to us looked to be about 100, especially about
Yes.
65 really.
Yeah.
But when she would be upstairs reading in the lounge, and the air raid would start, and my mother would say, "Granny, I think you ought to come down the cellar." To which she'd reply, "Ha! I'm not going down the cellar to please any blankety black German. I'll stay here." And she said, "Well, don't go to bed then, because the guns are making a lot of noise and the skylight is rattling, and you know, could easily come in." "Okay," she said. Anyway, after a while, my mother went to the grandma and woke her up. And "Granny," she said, she was having a dose, "Granny," she said, "you can go to bed now." To which Granny said, "Why, is the raid over?" "No," said my mother, "but the skylight has fallen in." So with that, she just toddled off to bed. She never ever came down the cellar at all.
Frank, how did your life change as the war progressed?
My life just changed in a natural way, not because of the war, but because I was getting older. Obviously, when I was 10, I wasn't allowed out at night in the dark anyway. With the blackout on, you couldn't see anything at all. It really was pitch dark. But as the war went on and you got more used to it, and I got older, I joined things like the Boy Scouts. And you'd go to the odd meeting, which meant that you were coming back in the dark, coming back in the blackout. By the time it got to 1943, which you might say was the height of the war, we didn't realise then, as kids, how bad it was for people in the desert, say, or whatever. But I was, myself personally, was very keen and joined the Army Cadets at 14. And there again, you start in the summer, you had a camp, but as the winter came, we were meeting at Wheeler's Lane schools, our winter place, yes.
Yeah.
As the winter came, it meant you were coming home in the blackout. But of course, by then, the blackout had been going on for 4 years. You had more or less forgotten what it was like before the blackout. And the one advantage of the blackout, I do remember this, was walking back and looking up at the sky, and you could really see the constellations, the various things in the sky, which now if you look up you don't see at all.
No.
And when it came to VE Day, which was when the first victory, which was about the 8th of May, the celebrations around here took place at the top of Ascot Road. And there were one or two wardens, air raid wardens living there, and they'd organised a bit of a party and a bonfire, and one of the clever clocks got a big piece of tin for the bonfire to be on. And of course, if somebody could produce a bottle of beer, it was handed around, because it was quite short in those days. And we were only looked upon as big kids. We went in the boozing at all, we were just sort of dancing around the bonfire. By the time it came to VJ Day, in the 45, I was actually at camp at Carnarvon with the Army Cadets where they dropped the atomic bomb. But I was back home here in time for the celebration, and they put the illuminated tram on from Birmingham, which was quite a disappointment really. It was nowhere near as good as the illuminated trams, of which I'd only seen pictures for the coronation and that sort of thing, Jubilee. But still, we did know we'd won. And you might say, in a way, with regards to food and shortages, they tended to get a little bit harder after the war. Why, I don't know, but there we are.
Frank, you weren't evacuated, and therefore you must have stayed in Birmingham and went to various schools. What was it like?
As far as school was concerned, for the first 2 or 3 terms, it made no difference. But the number of people at school did seem to go less and less and less. And in the end, the school I went to, which was Moseley New College, in School Road at the top of the hill, that folded, and I went to Stanley House on the Bristol Road. Stanley House was going from strength to strength. I wasn't evacuated. You asked me why. I can't really tell you why. I was just never asked, as I'd say. But with regards to evacuations, around about the end of the war, with the flying bombs that were turning up in London area, plenty of kids were evacuated from there. And we were duly told that we got one evacuee coming because they knew we got the accommodation. And the evacuees all arrived with labels on them in Birmingham, And the air raid wardens had the job of taking them round and allocating them. And one little girl, aged about, 6, 7, Eleanor Haddison, I think her name was duly brought to us and introduced. And the old man looked at her and said, there's only one thing we had to call you, and that's Thumbelina, because she was so small.
Yeah.
And as far as her schooling was concerned, that was Sunday. My mother just walked her up to the ordinary St Mary's School, which was in bottom end of School Road then, and just said that she got an evacuee. That's all right, and just put her in straight away. And she stayed with us for a few months, best part of a year, and till the war was finally over, and she went back home.
Thank you, Frank, for talking to me. I really enjoyed it.
It's brought back one or two memories to me. It's one of those sort of subjects. Once you start talking, one thing leads to another, and we go on all night.
Yeah.
But still, I've enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, as I should say.